It is now almost a decade plus years have passed since the Government of India got into the business of invigorating, if you will, the skill development of our so called demographic dividend, the youth. While there has not been any significant impact analysis or a longitudinal study of the outcome carried out by agencies, scholars and pundits have regularly been voicing their views about its overall efficacy. It is true that vocational education, which was the main delivery vehicle for skill development, has had a checkered past and had passed through and morphed into several adoptions and parentage. While continuous changes in strategy and delivery had benefited industry organizations and auditing agencies busy in organizing annual skill summits and producing copy-paste white papers, more serious concerns about the quality of content, trainers, trainees, pedagogy have largely remained unanswered. The central character in this theatre is that the youth, largely drawn from the rural background with little or no education, having truly little motivation or drive, often their aspirations are highly unrealistic. Their training is so shallow that the industry refuses to acknowledge that and often relies on its own time tested induction. One of the major problems affecting the overall impact and effectiveness of the vocational education in India has been the lack of interest shown by the so called below poverty line youth in opting for the training that can ensure livelihood for them. This is despite many incentives being offered to them on a platter. It is not uncommon to find batches after batches of youth getting dropped out during or even after training. Common sense would tell us that the youth who is desperately in need of a job would move heaven and earth to seek opportunities and avenues for livelihood. We have many evidences that the common sense or the prevailing wisdom does not really explain the behavior of these rural youth. Take for example the case of farmers. Despite knowing that the present method of farming is not productive, they continue with their old ways. Despite knowing that in handling pesticides enough precautions have to be taken, it is done most casually. In Senegal in Africa, we found that the hazardous chemically coated seeds were being washed in open streams, completely oblivious of the dangers it can cause. Year after year, post harvest losses continue for not changing to simple yet effective ways to reduce the losses. Despite knowing that the smoking causes cancer, still many are compulsive smokers. Despite knowing that saving is a good option during unemployment, people shop compulsively. Despite knowing that getting the lottery has minimal chance, youth spend their money in purchasing the tickets. These instances contradict the traditional view of men being very logical in their decision making process or in their selection of choices. The so called mythical youth, who is very careful, very logical, a good decision maker, and who knows what is good for him or her, does not really exist in reality. Instead, we find the youth doing things that will directly harm their prospects. In many ways, the behavior pattern is such that ensures self-sabotage. It is in these contexts that I would like to dwell upon the question of how we can enhance the value of the offering without too much of changes, so that the youth are not only drawn to the training, but also get transformed into a well disciplined and committed employee. In doing so, I would largely be guided by the principles of behavior economics. The questions that I would like to pose are somewhat like these. Firstly, how to revitalize the skill development movement that is already in vogue, how to enlist active participation of the youth, and finally, how to unlock and leverage the value of skill development. A common theme around these three questions is how can we increase the intangible value of skills training without tweaking much. How do we change the perception that skill training is only for those who are good for nothing and opt for training as a last recourse? All this boils down essentially to how the overarching skill ecosystem is perceived by its beneficiaries. Could we alter that perception using behavior economic principles? Human behavior, as we all know, is complex and does not necessarily follow the principles of economic decision making. There is no walk the talk syndrome visible. The reason why the youth take the decisions that are detrimental to their self interests can be summarized by highlighting few commonly observed syndromes. The first in the list is what I call, or what behavior economists call, as no rocking the boat syndrome. All of us have a kind of default setting mechanism embedded in us, which at the slightest threat of a change prefers to go back to its original setting. A new environment in a new setting is a threatening event for the youth, and their first impulse is to run back to their villages. Besides, it also saves them from making any active choices. That means, at a rational level, that by completing the vocational skills training, they may get a job that will take their families out of the poverty trap. Instead, they prefer to go for their default setting, their preset options. The present is familiar and comfortable, and the future is uncertain. So, any trigger that upsets the status quo forces them to retract. One important point here that is to be noted is the migration and its impact on the rural youth. I believe that migrating a rural youth to the metro cities is almost like a kidney transplantation. The body tends to reject it. But if employment opportunities are provided, say within 50 miles radius of the village from where the youth comes, he is most likely to opt for that, even with lower wages, as familiar surrounding is a great motivator. A simple way to break the psychological barrier would be to demonstrate a successfully trained youth or groups of youth who can motivate the fence sitters to join the training. The personality change in the trained youth with the gained confidence of working in a different setting successfully can force the fence sitters to change their default setting. In one of my previous organizations in India that has trained largest number of youths in vocational education, this was done with stunning results. When a rural youth sees another youth of the same stock doing well in a metro setting, they get motivated and inspired to emulate him or her. In recent times, we have seen few great examples of US educated and successful graduates with entrepreneurial zeal getting back to their roots in villages and motivating youth to learn and earn. The second syndrome is what I call as which is popularly known as a sunk cost effect syndrome. As the youth have spent their efforts, time and resources in the villages, they prefer to spend more in the same way rather than exploring the new options or choices that are made available to them on a platter. It is the famous boiled frog syndrome. it is necessary to address the negative implications of the already sunk costs and the futility of putting in more resources into them. That needs to be explained. At the same time, if the cost benefit analysis of opting for a new course of action is explained to the family, the impact is more lasting, because the family can exert the peer pressure on the youth more effectively. The third syndrome is the tendency to be loss averse than benefit gains. Again, this flies against the rational man theory. Individuals weigh losses more than the gains they might get. So, for the below poverty line youth, the perceived risks are psychological. What will I do in a new situation, in a new city, in a new environment, in a new social setup where I will lose my familiar environment, social circle, friends, and financial, how will I sustain in an unfamiliar place, so on and so forth. So, between the choices of losing something and gaining something, he prefers the first one. The counselors must emphasize minimizing costs and losses more than pointing out a very rosy picture of future prospects. So, if the messages are about reducing the existing loan burden, improving the health of the family and livestock, it will be more effective. Messages must be loss framed than gain framed. Also, the counseling need not be limited to the concerned youth, but should also include the elders in the family and the village heads and the opinion makers from the villages, as they exercise the final decision making regarding the future of the youth. The third aspect is the social norming. Behavior economists believe that most decisions are taken in a social context with social networks. Individuals are influenced by social preferences, identities, and norms. Many people imitate the behavior of others almost mechanically or automatically. The World Bank report in one of the studies said, and I quote, "Individuals are not calculating automatons, rather people are malleable and emotional actors whose decision making is influenced by contextual cues, local social networks and social norms and shared mental models." Quote complete. Social norms encourage imitation, herd behavior, and what I call reciprocity. Properly crafted messages exhorting the groups to follow a pattern as everybody else are already following that packs a powerful nudge. Everyone is doing it, why not you, is the implicit subtle message. To conclude, it is my view that the vocational education system needs to re-examine the strategy, if at all it has one, and study the principles of behavior economics and its astounding success in altering consumer behavior, and adopt few principles after due customization. That seems to be one positive way of developing interest in the rural youth to pursue vocational education and complete the training successfully and join the organizations which will enable them to create wealth, not only for them, for the family, for the society, and for the country as a whole. Thank you very much.